An elderly war veteran collapses in the middle of a hospital hallway. No doctor in sight, no time to waste. A young nurse, driven by instinct and training, steps in to save his life. Her reward? Immediate suspension. What she didn't know was that the man she saved had a brother with enough power and conviction to challenge the system itself. This isn't just a story about breaking rules. It's about why some rules need to be broken when lives are on the line. Now, let me take you back to the moment it all began. It was the kind of morning that slipped by unnoticed, the kind where coffee went lukewarm before the first sip, and nurses moved like clockwork through familiar routines. St. Mary's Hospital breathed in its usual rhythm, monitors blinking, shoes squeaking on polished floors, and patient charts shuffled like cards in a well-worn deck. Clara Reynolds moved among it all like second nature. At 30, she had already built a reputation, competent, focused, and unshakably ethical. With 6 years of experience and 0 incidents on her record, Clara was the kind of nurse who knew when to trust her training and when to listen to something deeper. She wasn't a rebel. She didn't break the rules, but she also didn't look away. That morning, she felt the tension building in her shoulders earlier than usual. A double shift loomed ahead, her third this week. A patient in room 312 needed a dressing change, and the pharmacy had once again delayed the morning meds. The pressure of it all sat in her spine like the weight she was too used to carrying. She paused at the nurse's station to sign off on a discharge order when movement in the hallway caught her eye. 2 orderlies wheeling in a new transfer. An elderly man lay on the stretcher, slight and still. His veteran's cap sat tilted on his head, weathered and sun-bleached, as though it had traveled more years than most people ever would. A plastic oxygen line curled beneath his nose, and the rise and fall of his chest was barely perceptible. Yet there was a strength in his presence, something in the deep grooves of his face, like carved stone weathered by wind and war. Clara glanced at the chart clipped to the stretcher. Leonard Garrison, age 78, transfer from regional cardiac irregularities, observation required. She noted the slight tremor in his hand as one orderly adjusted the pillow. Something about it, maybe the rhythm, maybe the fragility, made her stop for just a second longer. But time moved fast in hospitals. She turned away, back to her checklist, unaware that everything was about to change. The alarm hit like a gunshot. It was the flat, piercing sound no nurse ever ignored, a monitor slipping into a deadly rhythm. Or lack of rhythm. Flatline. Clara's body turned before her mind could catch up. She looked down the hallway, Leonard Garrison's gurney, unmoving. His arms had gone stiff, his head lolled to the side. The orderlies beside him stood paralyzed, eyes wide, unsure of what to do. No doctor, no crash team, just silence. And Clara. Her clipboard dropped, clattering to the floor, like the first note in a symphony of urgency. She sprinted. "Code blue," she called out, voice sharp, trained, sure. "Get the crash cart, now!" In one swift motion, she dropped the side rail and leaned over the frail body on the stretcher. No hesitation, no waiting for someone to tell her what she already knew. Her hands found position, interlaced fingers, locked elbows. Compress, count, breathe, repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her world narrowed to that one body, that one moment. Sweat formed on her brow. Her arms burned from the effort. She felt time slowing, stretching. 90 seconds, maybe more. And still no pulse. But she didn't stop. "Come on, come back. You don't get to go like this." And then, movement. A jolt ran through Leonard's chest, as if some unseen force had reached down and pulled him back. A shallow inhale, then another. A weak, faltering pulse lit up the monitor, like a flicker of hope. He was alive. Clara leaned back, trembling, her scrubs soaked through. But before she could breathe a full breath of relief, she heard it. The voice, the judgment, the punishment. Who authorized you to touch that patient? Supervisor Margaret Walters's voice sliced through the hallway, shrill and cold. He's not in your ward. That's a clear violation. Clara turned slowly, still catching her breath. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Walters stepped forward and unclipped Clara's ID badge with surgical precision. You're suspended, effective immediately. Leonard Garrison was alive. But Clara Reynolds, at that moment, was alone. The break room had never felt so small. Clara sat alone at the far corner table, her ID badge gone, her uniform damp with the residue of adrenaline and disbelief. In front of her sat a cup of untouched coffee and the white sheet of her suspension notice, blunt, cold, bureaucratic. Effective immediately, unauthorized medical intervention, pending internal review. The words stared back at her like a threat dressed in formal language. Through the glass walls of the room, she could see the subtle shift in atmosphere. Some colleagues avoided her gaze altogether. Others threw her quick, furtive glances, sympathy mixed with fear. No one wanted to be seen too close. Not now, not when politics and protocol were watching. Her phone buzzed once. A text from Nurse Jenkins. You did the right thing, but don't expect support. Everyone's afraid of liability. Clara stared at the message for a long moment before locking the screen and slipping the phone into her pocket. She didn't need comfort. Not now. What she needed was clarity. 6 years. 6 years of saving lives, holding hands through pain, sitting quietly beside dying patients who had no family left to call. She had missed birthdays, holidays, funerals, all for this job, this calling. And now she was being punished for choosing life over paperwork. A hospital staff member appeared at the doorway and gave her a tight nod. They're ready for you, he said quietly. The meeting room was colder than she remembered. The air had that artificial chill designed to keep people alert or uncomfortable. 5 faces greeted her, none of them kind. There was the director of nursing, pale and stiff. The hospital administrator, eyes glued to a stack of legal documents. Legal counsel. HR. And, of course, Margaret Walters, arms folded tight like she was shielding herself from reason. No allies. Miss Reynolds, the administrator began without preamble, you understand why we're here? Clara sat straighter in her chair, clasping her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. Yeah, your actions this morning, he continued, represent a serious breach of protocol. Intervening in a patient case outside your assigned department is— I performed CPR, Clara interrupted softly but firmly. A man went into cardiac arrest. There were no physicians present, no advanced life support trained staff. I did what was necessary. That wasn't your determination to make, Walters snapped. You acted out of turn. We have a system for a reason. Clara met her gaze, steady, clear. If I had waited for that system, Mr. Garrison would be dead. A silence fell, sharp and deep. Even the legal counsel glanced away for a moment. From the corner of her eye, Clara noticed a man seated in the waiting area outside the room. He wore a dark suit, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. But he was watching, listening. Then, suddenly, he stood and walked briskly out, already speaking into a phone. The administrator cleared his throat, trying to regain control. This isn't about intentions, it's about liability. Staff must operate within their scope. My scope, Clara said quietly, is saving lives. That's what I trained for. That's what I took an oath to do. The HR representative shifted in her seat. No one spoke. We'll reconvene once we've reviewed the security footage, the administrator said. Until then, your suspension stands. Claire rose to her feet without another word. No applause, no hand on the shoulder, no gratitude. As she walked out, she had no idea that the man who had left the room moments earlier was Colonel James Garrison, Leonard's brother. And he wasn't calling for legal advice. He was calling in something much stronger. At exactly 11 o'clock a.m., the rhythm of the hospital shifted. It began not with sirens or alarms, but with a sound few in St. Mary's had ever heard, the crisp, deliberate echo of polished dress shoes against linoleum. Every step was measured. Every stride is purposeful. Heads turned. A tall figure emerged in full military dress uniform, medals glinting under the fluorescent lights, each one a story of courage, sacrifice, and survival. Tucked beneath his arm was a finely crafted wooden box. On his other hand, an official government envelope, sealed and heavy with intention. Colonel Michael Harris didn't need to raise his voice. "I need to speak with your hospital director," he told the receptionist, who froze, wide-eyed at the sight before her. "Yes, sir. May I ask what—" "It concerns a matter of honor," the colonel said, standing straight, cap tucked under one arm like a flag folded after the battle. His presence wasn't loud, it was absolute. Within minutes, a quiet current of urgency pulsed through the hospital's upper ranks. The director of St. Mary's, who rarely descended from her administrative tower, was summoned to the same meeting room where Clara had just been scolded into silence. But this time the atmosphere had changed. When Clara re-entered, summoned unexpectedly, the energy was different, heavier but no longer hostile. Colonel Harris sat at the head of the table, back straight, eyes sharp. Around him, the same faces as before. The administrator, the legal counsel, the nursing director. But now, they looked less like judges and more like students called to account. "I understand," Colonel Harris began, his voice calm yet thunderous in effect, "that Nurse Reynolds has been suspended for providing life-saving medical care to a man in cardiac arrest." The director shifted in her chair. "Colonel, with respect, this is an internal matter. We have policies, procedures." "Leonard Garrison," Harris continued, not missing a beat, "is not just any patient." He placed the wooden box gently on the table and opened it. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was a purple heart. The room fell completely still. Staff Sergeant Leonard Garrison served 3 tours in Vietnam. During his second tour, his helicopter was shot down. Despite shrapnel in his leg and third-degree burns across his back, he returned to the wreckage 3 times, pulling out 4 men. 2 of those men are now surgeons. 1 is a sitting congressman. No one spoke. Even Margaret Walters seemed to shrink under the weight of those words. Colonel Harris reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, sliding it across the table. "I've reviewed your security footage," he said. "It confirms what the entire hospital knows already." Nurse Reynolds responded with professional precision and without hesitation. No other trained personnel acted. She alone followed the emergency protocol as it was meant to be used, in the service of saving a life. The director, fumbling, inserted the drive. On the screen, the room watched Clara's hands move with surgical accuracy, watched her fight for a man's life while others stood frozen. "In the military," Harris said quietly, "we have a phrase, initiative in the absence of orders. We train our best to act when hesitation would cost lives." He turned to Clara. "You didn't know Leonard's record. You didn't need to. You saw a man dying, and you did what your training and your conscience demanded." The hospital director inhaled shakily. "Given this new context, I believe Nurse Reynolds should be reinstated immediately." Colonel Harris's jaw clenched. "That's not enough." His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. "This woman doesn't deserve to return quietly to her station. She deserves recognition, because she acted with more integrity and courage than the institution that tried to silence her." There was a long silence. Then the director nodded. "You're right. We'll issue a public statement and begin reviewing our emergency response protocols." She already rewrote them, the colonel interrupted. You just need to catch up. He stood, extending a hand to Clara, spoke in the Byzantine baritone. On behalf of the armed forces and the Garrison family, thank you. As Clara took his hand, she noticed something she hadn't before. Pinned to his uniform was a medical service badge. He had once stood where she stood. And in that moment, Clara understood something profound. Sometimes the battlefield isn't across oceans. Sometimes it's a hospital hallway. And sometimes the enemy isn't gunfire or explosions. It's silence, it's red tape, it's fear dressed as authority. But not today. The door to the ICU clicked open, and for the first time in 3 days, Clara Reynolds walked in wearing her badge. It caught the light, a simple laminated square of plastic clipped to her chest, but now it felt heavier than ever, not with shame, not with punishment, with purpose. Around her, the unit was alive again. Beeping monitors, wheeled carts squeaking along freshly waxed floors, and patients whispering behind curtains. But something was different. The eyes that turned toward Clara weren't skeptical or fearful anymore. They were reverent. She moved toward her station with quiet grace, but before she could reach it, a familiar voice stopped her. You're the one. The words came in a hoarse whisper. Clara turned. There, propped up in a hospital bed, was Leonard Garrison. His face was pale, worn by the trauma his body had endured, but his eyes were unmistakably alert now. My brother told me what happened, he said. Told me what you did. Clara checked his IV line, adjusting it gently, her fingers steady. I was just doing my job, Mr. Garrison. Leonard chuckled softly, though it cost him some breath. Back in Nam, I pulled guys out of helicopters and carried buddies through the jungle when they couldn't walk. Never occurred to me that someone would carry me someday. His hand, spotted and frail, reached for hers. She took it gently. That's how it works, Clara said. We look out for each other. Later that afternoon, as the evening shift began to fill the unit, Clara spotted someone unexpected waiting near the nurse's station. Margaret Walters. Her posture had changed. Shoulders less rigid, arms no longer crossed in self-defense. She looked down briefly before stepping forward. Nurse Reynolds, she began, her voice softer than Clara had ever heard it. I owe you an apology. A public one, if you'll allow it. Clara blinked. Of course. Walters turned to face the group of nurses now gathered for shift change. She cleared her throat, the weight of leadership suddenly real again. I want to acknowledge something important, she began. 3 days ago, Nurse Reynolds made a decision that saved a life. I responded by punishing her for it. She paused, her voice trembled just slightly. I was wrong, and I am sorry. A quiet hush swept through the staff. Then Walters continued, From this moment forward, St. Mary's will implement a new emergency response protocol, the Clara Code. It authorizes any qualified nurse to initiate life-saving intervention in the absence of a physician. For a second, there was only silence. Then one nurse stood, another followed. The third began to clap. The room swelled with applause. Not thunderous, not performative, just steady, real. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, emotion swelling beneath the surface. But she didn't cry. Not here. Not yet. Just then, Dr. Morris, the hospital's chief of medicine, appeared in the doorway. Nurse Reynolds, he called above the clapping. The director would like to see you. Now. When Clara entered the conference room, she was surprised to see Colonel Harris again, this time standing beside the hospital director and Leonard's brother, James Garrison. We've reviewed our emergency response protocol, the director said, her tone quieter, more thoughtful now, and we've realized it's flawed. It's built too much on hierarchy, not enough on outcomes. She handed Clara a folder. We'd like you to lead a committee to help us rewrite it. With your experience and moral clarity, we believe you're the right person to lead this change." Clara opened the folder, glancing at the first few pages. Drafts, policies, gaps to close. For a moment she couldn't speak, but she nodded. As she stepped out of the room, she passed the ICU again. Through the window, she saw Leonard sitting upright, smiling at something James had said. The two brothers, soldiers both, laughing together. Still alive, still here. She paused, thought about everything. About how easily institutions forget their purpose. About how sometimes following the rules means letting someone die quietly. And how sometimes breaking them is the only way to honor what they were meant to protect. When she returned to her station, the room quieted for just a moment. But this time, no one looked away. They looked toward her, with respect, with trust. Clara didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The sun was starting to set beyond the narrow windows of St. Mary's ICU. Golden light spilled across polished floors and sterile walls, giving the cold hospital corridor a kind of fragile warmth. Clara Reynolds stood alone for a moment, just outside Leonard Garrison's room. Inside he was resting, his chest rising with the quiet ease of a man granted time he nearly lost. His brother sat beside him, the two sharing the kind of silence only family and war could create. Clara watched for a beat longer, then turned back to her evening rounds. The ICU moved around her, nurses checking vitals, machines humming quietly. But something had shifted. There was no announcement, no trumpet of change, but Clara could feel it in the way her colleagues moved, in the way they looked at each other, and at her, not as a rule breaker, not even as a hero, but as a compass, a reminder. Sometimes the difference between a system that works and one that fails is just one person who refuses to wait for permission. In the break room that night, Clara sat for a few quiet minutes before heading home. Her badge lay flat on the table next to her hand. On her lap, the first draft of the new emergency protocol rested open. Sections still unmarked, questions still unanswered. But it was a beginning. She thought about how easy it would have been to do nothing, to follow orders, to let fear or liability or not my job justify standing still. No one would have blamed her, but a man would have died, and she would have known it. Some victories didn't look like medals. Some came in the form of a breath, a pulse returning beneath her hands. The next morning, nurses across all wings of the hospital received a printed memo on their desks. Effective immediately, the Clara Code is now in effect. In the absence of a physician, any trained nurse may initiate life-saving action without prior authorization. No hesitation, no punishment, just action, just care. No ceremony, just clarity. Later that week, Clara passed a nurse she didn't know in a hallway. The young woman paused, nervous, then said quietly, "I just wanted to say thank you." Clara smiled. "We look out for each other." That was it. No fanfare. But she walked a little taller after that. Sometimes the battlefield isn't sand and smoke and enemy fire. Sometimes it's policy binders and office chairs and silence in the face of need. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is remember why the rules were written in the first place and have the courage to break them when they no longer serve. Clara Reynolds didn't ask for praise. She didn't wait for permission. And because of that, a life was saved, a hospital changed, and a new kind of hero was quietly born in the hallway between protocol and purpose.